Hey, welcome to this episode of Happy Today podcast. Today we are joined by Nance and also Sami from HappySignals. Alan is the co-founder and president at XLA Collab and has a long experience of leading the art and science of experience. Welcome, Alan. So good to have you here.
Welcome. Thank you for having me.
So can you let us, people in the audience, know a little bit about XLA Collab? So kind of what's your purpose, what's your goal, and what you're trying to achieve?
Well, at XLA Collab, we do focus, as you said, on the art and science of experience. So it's very important for us to combine the insights that come from data with understanding of people, of the humanity of IT. Our focus areas are helping large technology organizations to serve the business better by focusing more on experience than, for instance, process. And we also see experience as a logical evolution on top of the things that we've already been doing for the past 20 or 30 years. So we're not saying get rid of SLAs and KPIs, but what we are saying is repurpose them, but repurpose them around people, whether people are employees, people are customers, or people are students. Whatever people are, they are creating your brand, and that's how you should be treating them.
Right, cool, thank you. And then also today we were discussing that we published this happiness score report, and you said that it's a little bit like, you know, provocative and kind of you know, gets you thinking, like, what is the meaning of you know, what we found. So how would you summarize that a little bit? And then I think Sami has a few questions around that, so just have a conversation.
Well, what I would say, Pasi and Sami, is first of all, congratulations on another great piece of work. And as you say, I find it very thought-provoking because we generally don't have enough data and data at scale. And so what this report gives us is some really good ideas, and it proves two things off the bat. One is that experience matters, and the other is that leadership matters. So if we get the right information into the hands of the leaders about what experience can do for their relationship with the business and for their relationship with their employees, it's a very, very exciting thing. And I think also the other thing that came out of this particular survey is what a fabulous job service desks have done in general in this pandemic. You know, things like looking at the volumes and the success rates. And of course, there's some setbacks simply because everybody's been reorganizing their paradigms at work. But I think this is also a great, a great accolade for all the people in service desks that despite everything, huge progress has been made across the board. So those are my big takeaways.
Very good. Hey, Alan, again, great to have you here because it has been great to work with you guys and have a lot of good discussion about what really is experience and that kind of sometimes a bit theoretical, but we have been going deep. But I wanted to ask you that when reading that report, what is maybe the most kind of a biggest surprise for you? Was there any? Was something only kind of making sure that things that you were already thinking, or was there something that you were thinking that this is a bit surprising?
Well, there's a couple of things. There's something new for me here that I'm really, really pleased about. So for the last 2 years, we've been talking about, for instance, the continuum of consequences, where you have a commercially exciting XLA that's contractually valid. And one of the great things for me coming out of your survey personally was the validation that if you have a really good mix of incentives, both positive and negative, especially towards the external service providers, that has huge benefits. And that's something that we've been pushing and that we believed, but now we have data to support that. So from that perspective, it's great, super great. The second thing for me is something I'd like to think a little bit more about is what I'm seeing you create with your data is a bit of what I'm calling a humanity index. And I love the way that HappySignals is pioneering demographics, personas, and cultural data. And I think what we're starting to see is on the support side, most people come to work to do their best every day. They can't do their best. It's about the...
Sorry, now we lost your audio a bit. So it was okay.
Oh, sorry.
Now it's okay. Now it's back.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't know how much of that you lost. So I'll just go back to the whole thing. So if you look at the work that you've done around demographics, personas, and cultural data, it's very innovative. And I think we're seeing a humanity index start to emerge that's probably more important than the traditional KPIs and SLAs that we've looked at. And on the support side, most people come to work every day to do their best. And so when they're not able to do their best, it's because of the systems, the tools, and the measurements that get in the way. And I think you're starting to show that and starting to show how that can change. But on the other side, it's interesting to see that the demographic and the personas and the cultural data, especially in the smaller countries that are, let's just say, the more difficult to please, are also giving us some insights into how effective different portal strategies are, for instance, how important chat is. And another big one for me is that internal service desks outperform external service desks, but there's no reason for that based on this data. There's a huge opportunity for external service desks to switch gears. And when they apply themselves, there is a huge opportunity for them. But they do have to make some changes, and I think this report starts to show what those changes need to be.
Yeah, and I think that's for us was, at least for me, there was huge surprises in the differences between how the internal and external, how different they are, and many of the what I was thinking before that the internals must have these and these practices on a better level were proven totally opposite. So the outsourced services provider were having a lot of more precise practices of using experience data, and it was more formalized. They did more decisions based on it. They are sharing it more openly, and that kind of stuff was really surprising for me. But as you said, internals are, from end user perspective, they are better. There were two reasons why kind of were proven that yes, it is because of some differences in channel behavior, some differences also and internals are better to solve the ticket in the first contact or with the first team. But still, there was so much more that only explains maximum half of the difference. So that is one question to you, that what you think is really what is causing that perception difference? Others are working in the same company. How much does that influence really the scoring and that kind of, this is nothing we can prove by the data, these feelings. And that's why I wanted to have a discussion around this, how you feel about it.
Well, when I read the data that you produce here, there's a couple of things that stand out to me. And one of them is a paradox. And that is that in certain areas, the internal service desk actually solves less, but people are happier with let's just say, a poorer level of service. So that's interesting. So just as you say, Sami, the internal service desk doesn't have better people, but they do have a different approach. And I think that where the service desk, so there's more of an opportunity for service desk to improve than that we need to look at the internal service desk to figure out what's going on. If we look at the humanity index, for instance, it's very clear people prefer walk-in service, then they prefer to talk to somebody, then they prefer a chat, and right at the end is the portal, right at the end. And the portal has two things going for it. First of all, it's impersonal. So on a humanity index, it ranks the least in terms of being a personal relationship that you create. The second is that portals, more often than not, are optimized for routing to specialized experts. And if there's one thing customers hate, it's routing. So I think if we look at the internal service desk and we assume they're both equally committed to helping, they're both equally armed with the right knowledge and skills, then we have to look at what external service desks have pushed. And I think you mentioned this. They are still fighting an efficiency battle. And the more effort they put into solving the efficiency battle, the worse they get in terms of creating a meaningful connection to the employee. And so this is where I think leadership matters. We see that in your data that where a CIO is very outspoken on experience, there's a natural improvement. And we all know that, right? If a leader emphasizes something, people will go and follow that. But the other side of it is that the leaders need to be asking the external service desk something else. External service desk won't just move away from an emphasis on efficiency at portals and routing unless the room is created for them to do that. So I think that your report is also a call to action for CIOs and heads of IT and service desk leaders to think seriously about just how do they want their service desks to operate from a customer experience perspective.
I think that's very key area, and I think there's about trust. I think that is the word I would like to use as a really defining the maturity of the organization or the cooperation between the customer and the provider, if they really are working together and kind of sometimes forgetting the agreement in a way that it's working together is more important. They trust each other, and then they are able to move away from the SLAs, which are quite often just to securing the agreement that the provider is delivering at least something. And then it is so tight in money that is the only thing what they can focus on, that they are not getting those sanctions and so on. And I have been at least 4 times in a situation that the provider has said to me that the customer is not ready for XLAs. And the same customer has said to me that the provider is not ready. And I was like, what is going on here? And it's like, then you kind of started whose fault it is, and then it's the procurement. And then it's like, maybe that's an easy excuse for everybody that yes, we have now still 4 years left and nobody wants to open the agreement. These are practical things that come up when you kind of everybody start to be more and more, yes, perception of end users and how they feel and is more and more important. But still the change sometimes feels a bit slower. Or how do you feel? Is the change in the industry not fast now or what?
Well, I think what we're starting to see, we're definitely starting to see very large companies now trying to introduce XLAs into their service provider agreement, but they still want to be cost effective. And I think the first thing that leaders on the buying side need to recognize is just how important is it when you have an opportunity to talk to an employee or talk to a customer, especially if it's an employee that is on stage with the customer. So somebody in sales, somebody in support. And I think you've got to stop looking at that as a barrier, as a challenge, as a problem. You've got to look at it as an opportunity. And I've always said, and this is even more true for call centers than it is for service desks, that it is the single source of value that is not achieved by large enterprises, is the information and the relationship they can build at the service desks. And they do a terrible job of it. And I think the efficiency has made the chances of survival for enterprise IT lower, because they've chosen to annoy their most important communities in favor of being cheap. Now, on the other side, there are providers that have chosen scale as their answer to that efficiency problem. So they've chosen to automate at scale. They've chosen to script at scale. You know, if you go to some of these large service desk centers in India and the Philippines, and all these people are in boxes with scripts, all focused, and they're trying to tell you, we know how to run portals efficiency. We know how to deal with more calls in a lower period of time. But what they don't tell you is, and that means that your customers over time are going to like you less. So I am going to do what you asked me to do, and as a result, you could get fired. So as long as you understand that, this is what we're going to do. But obviously, people don't talk that way when you're talking about working together. So, you know, if you talk to somebody and say, I want to do as many calls as I can a day, you're going to get a different answer than if you say, I want to make sure that every call makes the employee feel better about working here. That's a different thing you're asking them to do. So I think the real change has to come from the buying side, not from the provider side. But the provider definitely does have options to improve, and we see that from your data.
Yeah, and it has been quite one of the biggest surprises for me was that even in those cases when you have an outsourced service desk, experience was the biggest reason for outsourcing. And that was kind of the thing that I wouldn't have expected. But on the other hand, now we have to remember that these are the customers of HappySignals that are in this survey, meaning that they have already recognized the experience is the key thing. So we cannot kind of say that that is the whole role that would be in that situation. But still, I was expecting that the main reason would have been cost efficiency. But that.
Well, I think we've talked about this before. So I think there might be something also in the way that the question is phrased. So I think that it is a criteria, and I do think it's a measurement. My own experience is very rarely have service desks been outsourced other than efficiency. It does happen, but not often. So I don't think, but I think what people reconcile in their mind is, yes, I'm doing it for efficiency, but I'm adding in experience targets. So it is a main objective. The truth is, though, that the main objective for many is still cost savings. I agree with you that the clients that have done that and have now realized that that may not be so smart and are working with HappySignals, that they're adjusting. And so I think I can understand why you're getting this feedback. I still don't trust it completely, though.
You might be right that the thing is that if I would be a CEO of a big company and I have cost pressure, I might have to be making the decision I outsource it. But to mitigate that risk, I would set the main target to be experience.
Exactly. And I think you're seeing that paradox. But I think for me, the more interesting paradox from your data is this thing about internal service desk customers enjoying a less good experience. So what we see is if you choose to service your customers closer to the high end of the humanity index. So if you say everything is walk-in, everything is telephone, everything is chat, and I think the difference between telephone and chat is going to be a demographic between Gen Z and millennials and older people. But the walk-in is always the highest. But if you actually look at the walk-in, the time that's lost is not significantly better. If you look at what internal people are unhappy about, I think it's 54% are unhappy because the problem's not resolved. So it's an interesting paradox that people really prefer this, even though it's not giving them measurably better service. So I think this humanity aspect is something that we need to spend a little bit more time on and take advantage in the ongoing surveys of what we learn about the personas and the demographics, because I do think you're going to see those change as the demographic in companies change. I think chat, if it's done well, is going to replace email and the phone over time. But I'm a little pessimistic about whether the combination of portals that route to experts is ever going to work in terms of having a big positive impact on the experience. Yeah, the data you present seems to show it's a failed strategy. Yeah. Now, I know there are going to be people in the service desk in HDI and so that tell me, no, if you implement portals properly, they're amazing. But part of me, based on your data, is I don't think this is ever going to work. And that's a really big challenge for the industry.
Yeah, and I would maybe say that we saw some data today that we can't really we saw some data today that we can't really talk more about, but it kind of, saw that they, somebody did a portal change and the experience went down, even though they again tried to redo them. So I kind of agree with you, Alan, that probably there are other channels that will be more successful than the portals.
Yeah, but I think there also is
still on this kind of request side, kind of on the web shop side, they work. I mean, that's fine. But when you have a issue that you need to talk with somebody, it's always, if you have that humanity, that human connection, and you feel that somebody is helping you.
Right.
I think it's much better than you open something and you put something in a black box and hope it gets resolved. So yeah.
And I think what I'd be interested on that, Pasi, is when we look at the more difficult, the more demanding countries, they tend to be smaller countries, with the exceptions of like Germany. They tend to be smaller countries which have a lot of face-to-face culture and unusual languages as well, right? So if we obviously all of Scandinavia has some commonality. A lot of it has some commonality, but they're languages that aren't widely spoken outside of Sweden. You see it with the Dutch as well a little bit. So I also think that these cultures are naturally inclined to connection and the feeling that they're being taken seriously, the feeling that they're recognized as individuals. If I look at Northern European, Scandinavian culture, individuality is extremely important.
Yeah.
And I think we can see that reflected in that humanity index of channels.
Hey, I think this discussion has been super interesting, and I think now we go into so much details that we probably will continue for an hour. So maybe bring it a little bit back. I think the last point you made at some point was that you think that the buyers really need to learn more on how to buy services. Maybe also what we see from our customers, they are asking a lot like, how do we write these XLAs? So if somebody needs help on understanding that, how can they get in contact with you guys?
Well, yes, straight at alan.nance@XLACollab.com. This is what we do. We create XLAs that work, and we see them working as you do. So we're very willing to help people, and not just on the XLA to make sure it's contractually valid and it makes commercial sense, but also around how do you measure, right? So how do you get the best out of HappySignals? How do you get the best out of the SLA data that you've got? So those are the things that we try to help people with. So thanks for that plug, Pasi.
Excellent. And I think because it sounded like we could definitely like pick 2 or 3 other topics. So maybe we'll do another podcast in the near future as well. I think the whole aspect that you brought to the happiness score was really interesting. Any last thing you, Sami, wanna mention or?
Yeah, just thank you, Alan, and let's continue to discuss in this podcast and out of this podcast as well, of course.
Perfect.
Well, again, I would once again thank you guys for doing this. It's one of the few surveys at scale that are repeated with a consistent structure and format, even though I know that you're updating it all the time. And so it's incredibly valuable for all of us that are trying to push change in this and create a movement. So once again, thank you for doing this, and thank you for sharing.
Cool, thank you. And as I usually end the podcast, stay happy and stay safe.